What is going on, guys, and welcome back to the channel. A couple of videos back, we found an abandoned 1985 Chevy Camaro that had been sitting for well over a decade, but before it got abandoned, someone started to swap in this mystery big block, so we got the car home with the full intentions of just down and dirty, getting it running and driving with what it had. But we quickly decided that this thing is definitely going to see boost. So we decided to go ahead, pull the mystery big block out, throw it up on the stand, and dive into it. Now, I'm sure this is not the ideal candidate of a big block to throw a whole bunch of boost at, but it is the big block that we have. So today, we're going to get this thing torn down, see if there's anything done to it, and if there's anything that we can do to give it a better chance at living once we throw some boost at it. So let's get through the intro and jump right into today's video. Now that we've gotten through the intro, before we start diving into this thing, let me give you guys the little bit of information that I have on it. So when we picked the car up, I was told that this was originally a 396 that our local machine shop reworked into a 402. I was also told that it is really fresh. The car does have a poorly welded roll cage in it, as well as a whole bunch of suspension arms, which gives me a little bit of hope that they were aimed at going drag racing, so it might have some aftermarket goodies in there. But we won't know until we dive into this thing. So let's grab some tools. The first thing we're going to do is pull the valve covers, see what we're working with VALVETRAIN wise. Then we'll see if there's any oil in it, pop the oil pan, and then start working our way through this thing. So let's grab some tools and get to work. Now we can start undoing the valve cover. First peek here. All stock stuff, so that's kind of a bummer. Engine looks pretty decently clean though. Everything does look clean. It just looks like some factory rockers though, which kind of a bummer, like I said. I'm gonna pull the other one off just to make sure there's no rust in it, and then we'll go ahead, pull the intake manifold off, and go from there. Same thing, looks pretty clean, looks decent. Let's go ahead and get the intake manifold pulled off and see what we've got. Now I'm gonna start undoing the intake manifold. Now that we got all the bolts out of there, let's grab a mallet. We'll hit this intake manifold and see if we can't get this thing off. Things are heavy. Definitely had some coolant going through it at one point. Looks like anyways. Doesn't look horrible though. Runners look pretty good. Gasket was definitely smoked. It's old. But looks like it's in pretty good shape, so that's a good sign. And it's just an old school Edelbrock Performer. Looks like maybe a 2.0. Nothing special for what we're trying to do, but better than a stock one, I guess. So we'll set this off to the side. We'll have to clean this all up when we're ready, but let's keep diving deeper into this thing and see what it's got. So as you guys seen, we went ahead and pulled the valve covers and the intake manifold off, and as we can see down in here, sadly, it does look like it still has a flat tappet camshaft. Push rods look pretty stock, but then when we come up to the VALVETRAINs, the rockers are definitely stock. As you can see, I pulled one off because I wanted a better look here, but the springs do look like they are potentially aftermarket. They look like some sort of dual spring with like a damper in there or something. But we'll have to do some more investigation there and see what we want to do. I was hoping that we were going to find a hydraulic roller cam that was in good shape, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Now, we could measure this cam to see what it is, but I'd really like to get away from the flat tappet just out of personal preference. So the next thing we're going to do is pull the spark plugs out. I'm going to spray some WD-40 in there before we start turning this thing over a whole bunch, just to try to keep the cylinders in the best shape possible. And then we can go through and start taking the rest of this valve train apart. Now, one of the things I did notice is that this head does have thread-in studs, and it does seem to be an oval port head. So this thing's got a lot of flow for a stock head, in my opinion, especially if you're used to looking at Hondas or LS's. Those are some pretty big ports, so that's awesome to see. But let's keep diving into this thing and keep going. All right, guys, so like I said, the next thing I'm going to do is start pulling all the valve train apart. Now, I get a little OCD with it. I label everything where it came from, just in case the engine sits apart.
So like I said, guys, we go through and just loosen up any rocker that doesn't have tension on it. Once we get all the ones that are already loose off, we can go ahead, rotate the engine over, and we will create some more loose ones, and then we can pop those ones off as well.
And then we can move on to pulling the lifters, flip this thing over, and pull the oil pan. So I'm just going to find whichever one's loose, like this one right here is loose, and then we'll pop it free.
So like I said, guys, I just went through any one that didn't have tension on it. We went ahead and popped it off, and then we turned the engine over a little bit so we can get some more that are loose. Once we turn it over, we can pop those ones off, and we just keep going through that process until all of them are off.
Now that we've got all the rockers and push rods out of the way, we can start pulling lifters out. So we're just going to start right here with cylinder 2. Want it to feel how they slide. They actually feel really good. Slide smooth. They actually look fantastic. You guys probably won't be able to see it, but those things look basically brand new. So it's kind of a shame we're not going to use these. I'd like to go with a roller. I mean, I'm not going to rule it out completely, but I'd really like to put a cam and some roller hydraulic lifters in it. But honestly, those look brand new. At least this one does. So I'm going to go ahead, set it in the bag with the rest of the parts, and we will pop the rest of these out. Now that we've gotten to this point, I did decide, since this thing is most likely going to be seeing boost in the very near future, we might as well go ahead, pull the cylinder heads off, see what kind of pistons in it, see if there's any rust issues or anything else from this thing sitting. We're definitely going to be lapping the valves while the heads are off, and we might do a little bit of port work depending on what they look like. And it's also going to give us a great opportunity to measure the cylinder bore and see if this thing is actually a 402. So let's go ahead and get the heads pulled off this mystery big block and see what we're working with. Oof, that didn't feel great. Alright, I'm just going to keep working in that order and jam these things out, and then we can run them out. Alright, these ones are backed off pretty good. I'm going to give it a couple taps with a rubber dead blow and just see if we can't get this thing to pop free. There we go. Holy crap. Ugh. Big block heads are heavy. I wasn't expecting that. I mean, I knew it would be heavy, but that was real heavy. So, let's go ahead. Oof. Alright, so that doesn't look as great as I thought it did. Now that we've got the cylinder head off this thing, we can do a little bit more investigating. So there is some rust in here, which I'm not a huge fan of. So that kind of is a bummer. But the cylinder walls where the pistons ride don't look that bad. The cross hatching actually looks extremely fresh. But as of right now, I think we're going to strip it down, pick up a ball hone for this size bore, and give it the 1-2 garage special and get it cleaned up best we can and just roll with it. So let's go ahead, get the other head pulled off, then we can flip it over, pull the oil pan, and start taking the rotating assembly out. Now we can do the same exact thing on this side. I'm going to use that same torque sequence, work from the outside on the way in, get this head pulled off here, and see what it looks like. Now that we've got the cylinder head off this side, we can take a closer look. Now, I'm not sure if this camera will focus on it, but the cross hatching on the cylinder walls looks really good over here. Honestly, this side, I would just clean this thing all up and put it back together. But since the other side's so tore up, we're definitely gonna have to at least ball hone it. So I'm not sure what these little things are. They look like little seeds or something, not really sure. But this side looks really good. So let's get this thing flipped over. We'll see what the bottom end looks like and go from there. Now that we've got this thing rolled over, let's pop the pan off and see what we find. All right, let's give this thing a tap and see what it looks like. All right, guys, let's see what we've got. 2-bolt main, kind of a bummer. Is what it is though. Didn't really expect much else. Crankshaft looks really good though, really clean. Now that we've got the oil pan off this thing, we have a pretty good idea of what's going on in the mystery big block here. And I have to say, I'm pretty pleasantly surprised with what we found. Now I'll give you guys a full rundown on a list of the mystery big block and what we found in this thing so far. But before we do, I want to pop the balancer, the timing cover, and get the cam out so that we can take a look at that. And we will run right through the list of everything that we found. All right, let's go ahead and get this balancer puller installed. Sorry for the background noise. We've got the heater going. I'm not sure if you guys can tell, but we've got a pretty good snowstorm going on. So great day to work on your big block Chevy. But we're gonna go ahead and install this center pin here. Get that threaded in. So I just have the basic Harbor Freight balancer puller. I've only used it a couple times. Doesn't work great on LS stuff, but I'm hoping for the big block it'll work out fine. So we're gonna need this. We're gonna need these 3 up here. Then we'll need this piece and a couple washers. So let's head over to the engine, get this thing on, and try to get the balancer off. So for removing the balancer, I actually think the book says to use this piece here, but we used this on an LS once, and we were very lucky to be able to save the crankshaft after what this did to it. So now I always try to use those threaded inserts, not to mention when you're by yourself, it's just much easier because it holds everything in place for you while you try to get this all lined up. So book says to use this one. I like to use the threaded one. And then instead of turning this to pull it off, we're actually going to be using this just like that, and it'll pull this thing right off of there for us. So let's get this on with our other bolts and give it a try. Now that we got this thing all lined up, I'm going to run those bolts in a little bit more, and then we can start pulling this thing out. All right, now that we've got the balancer loose, I'm going to go ahead and zap these bolts out, and we can take this thing right out of our way. We'll set it aside for now with the hardware and get to taking the timing cover off. Now that I broke them all free by hand, I'm going to go ahead and use the little gun here and run them out. Now that we've got the engine flipped over on the stand, I do want to roll it over and just see if they have the cam lined up dot to dot, or if they degreed it in a different location, just so that we have it for our records if we decide to reuse this valve train for a little while. Now, I did notice that someone did install a dual roller chain on it, which is awesome to see and leaves me pretty hopeful for the valve train. So let's see if they have it timed dot to dot. Then we'll pull the cam out and give a full rundown on what we found inside the mystery big block. Now that we verified that the cam is just lined up dot to dot, that's nice and easy to remember for if we decide to reuse this valve train for a little while. But let's get the cam pulled out so that I can give you guys a full rundown of all the good and the bad that we found inside this mystery big block. Alright guys, let's go ahead and carefully try to slide this cam out. I found these bolts in the balancer puller kit, so that'll be handy for us. But let's go ahead and see if we can slide this cam out. It's one of my least favorite things is getting the cams in and out. I don't know why. I always feel like I'm beating them up, but it's a Crowder cam, so that's cool. It is aftermarket. I'll show you guys a closer look when we break down all the parts that we have. Now that we've got the cam pulled out, the next thing I want to do is pop a rod and piston out, take a closer look at it. The pistons do seem to be aftermarket, and there is a number on them, so if we clean them up, I can look up that number and see exactly what we have, because I want to find out if these are going to be reusable for reassembly. The only thing we'll definitely have to do is gap a set of rings, since once this thing goes back together, it is going to be with the thought of boost in mind. So let's get a rod and piston pulled out so we can lay everything out and I can show you guys exactly what we found inside our mystery big block. Now that we've got this thing flipped over, we can finally pull our first piston and rod. So we're going to start right up here with cylinder number 1. I was getting ready to mark the connecting rod and the cap, but someone already did it and they only did it on the one side. So indexing them and getting them back in their proper place will be nice and easy. So let's go ahead, grab a socket and a ratchet. We'll pop that one free, slide it out, and see what we've got. All right, let's see what we've got in here. So it went like this. I want to try to keep them in the same orientation that they were. So number 1 there, this one goes here. Set this to the side for a second and see what we've got. I'm not gonna lie, I don't love what I'm seeing in that bearing. So I'm gonna go ahead, set this to the side. We'll grab a rag and get it all cleaned up and then look a little bit closer at it. All right guys, so as you've seen, we got our first piston and rod knocked out of the big block, and I've got some good news, but also some bad news. So first off, we see that this is a factory forged rod and they were using ARP hardware. And then if we look at the piston, it is stamped 60 over and the number in it is L2240N, which comes back to an aftermarket forged dome piston. I'll put some more information about this piston at the end of the video when we cover everything else that we found. So I was pretty stoked with all of that. So we got to looking a little bit harder and quickly found that there is a big gouge in this crankshaft. Now I'm not sure how well you guys can see it, but there is a good gouge all the way around that definitely catches my fingernail. So that's definitely a huge bummer. It lines up almost perfectly with the oil passage, and I'm not sure if you guys can see it on the rod too, but pretty good gouge on both ends all the way around, which is definitely a huge bummer. I was hoping to be able to just throw some bearings and some rings in this thing, get it back in the car, get it running NA so that we could start building a turbo kit, but it doesn't look like it's gonna go that way. So I'm glad that I didn't just take it home and try to fire this thing up and end up causing a bunch more damage. So there is that, but it's definitely still a bummer because if it has to go to the machine shop, it's gonna be down longer than we would hope. But next thing that we're gonna do is continue pulling this thing apart. I'm gonna get the rest of the rods and pistons out. I'm gonna pull some mains, see what everything else looks like so that we can come up with a game plan to bring it to our machine shop and see what they say, see if it's fixable, what they recommend doing next. So we'll go ahead, get this thing the rest of the way torn down, then I'll show you everything else that we found inside the mystery big block. Now that I've got all the pistons and rods out to this point, I'm going to get the oil pump out of our way. Everything's going to have to come apart anyway, so might as well just go ahead and pop it out. Pop that loose. That's interesting. I don't know why, but I didn't think that would wiggle. So I'm just going to go ahead and set this stuff to the side, and we can continue pulling our rods and pistons out, and then we can start doing mains. And then hold it with my knee, swap to my hand, carefully feed it out, and boom, we have our last rod and piston out. Now, like I said, it is a complete shame because this crankshaft actually looks extremely good, except for this front journal. If they all looked like this one and the other two, then I would have just slapped bearings in it and this would be a non-issue. We'd be throwing it back together. But since that first one has that big groove in it, I definitely want to get the opinion from the machine shop and see what they recommend we do. I'd really like to be able to use this crankshaft, but it is what it is. So let's go ahead and start pulling some mains, see what those look like, and go from there. Now that we've got all the rods and pistons out, the crank actually feels like it spins really good. So I'm pretty happy with that. Next thing we're going to do is go ahead and start pulling mains off. Doesn't really matter how you pop them, but I'm still going to do it how I always do. Outer first, work our way in, break them all loose, and then pop them all out. Just like the connecting rod caps, these main caps are already numbered from someone else being in here. Otherwise, I'd be going through and stamping them or marking them so we don't get them mixed up, because we definitely want these to go back in the same place regardless. So they're all stamped right along here. We obviously know that's the back one. And then there's an arrow on them all too. So orientation won't be an issue. But let's go ahead, finish getting these pulled off. Now we got them all popped free. Let's go ahead, pull this first one and see what it looks like. Hope for the best. Want to try to keep the bearings in the proper orientation here. Yeah, this front one has a little groove to it too. Something had to have caused this. What, I'm not really sure, but something. These front ones have the same type of groove that the connecting rod cap had. I don't know if metal got in here or what exactly caused it, but I'll wipe it off, we'll put it in the container over there, and we will pop the next one. Oh. This one's ugly too. Real ugly. You guys should be able to see this one. Not sure how well you guys can see that, but that one's pretty well chewed up. Deep, deep grooves right around it. So something got into these last couple journals here, crankshaft and connecting rods, and just wiped it right out. Crank looks good. Bearing looks like it sat for a long time, but no deep gouges like the other one, and the crank looks completely fine on that one. This one looks funky, but I don't see a big gouge. This one could probably use a little polish, but nothing I can feel. Bearing looks a little odd though. Again, we'll add it to the pile, and I'm gonna just try to keep all this stuff together and organized so when we go to the machine shop, I can bring this stuff with us and see what they think and go from there. Because if we have an oiling issue or something along those lines,
I would much rather figure it out now and address it before we put new parts in it and have a similar issue. And this one is obviously our thrust washer as well. So now that we've got all of the main caps and connecting rod caps off, I am seeing a pattern here. Most of our issue seems to be happening right up front here in these 3 front journals. Now, I don't know the oiling system on a big block Chevy all that well, but the fact that the oil pump bolts to the rearmost cap tells me that most likely it's feeding oil from there forward, and that would explain why we're seeing an issue with these 3 front ones if it's an oil starvation issue. Like I said, I'm not positive, but I'll definitely mention that to the machine shop and see what they say. Maybe that Melling pump that's already on here just wasn't enough to keep up with what they were trying to do. But this thing looks relatively fresh to be seeing these issues, so I'll make sure to ask them. It definitely could just be a contamination issue, but hopefully they can fix it regardless. So we'll get this thing pulled out tomorrow, run over there, see if they can take a look at it, and go from there. Alright guys, so now that we've got our mystery big block taken all the way apart, we definitely found some pretty cool stuff inside this thing. Definitely an old hot rodder put this engine together, so pretty pumped with some of the stuff we found, and then a little bummed out with some of the other stuff. So we're going to start off at the cylinder heads and work our way right through this big block. Now, any number that's either cast or stamped into the piece that we're looking at, I'll put up on your guys' screen so that if you want to check it out further, you can definitely do that, because those are the numbers I used to do my research when I was trying to figure out what exactly we had here. So we're going to start off right over here at the cylinder heads and work our way right through this big block. So starting off with our cylinder heads, these seem to be a factory cast 396 performance based head. They are an oval port head and they seem to be in okay shape, just a bunch of surface rust on the runners and on the chambers themselves, but the chambers don't look all that bad. I think we'll be able to clean them up just fine, lap the valves, and put these things right back to work. Now, if we take a look under the valve cover area, we do have factory thread-in rocker studs. We have guides, and then these seem to be aftermarket springs. Now, there's no number stamped in them, so I don't know exactly what we have here, but they are a dual spring with a flat damper. So they look to be a pretty nice spring. Everything I looked up online, these look to be a comp style spring. But once again, I'm not 100% sure exactly what they are. We could have them tested, but we'll worry about that a little bit later on in the build. So let's head over to the other bench. I'll show you guys what lifters, cam, and rockers we found inside this thing. Now that we've seen our cylinder heads, let's take a quick look at our valve train. So as far as the rockers go, nothing fancy there, just some stamped steel factory style rockers. I'd like to put a nice set of roller rockers on this thing. But moving over to our lifters, these are marked and it is 9377, which comes back to a severe duty hydraulic flat tappet from Crane Cams. So we'll set those aside. They seem to be in really good shape. I just don't think we're going to stick with a flat tappet setup, but that all depends how deep we're into this engine once we get the crankshaft back. Now, as far as push rods go, not sure exactly what these ones are. There's no markings on them. But moving over to the camshaft, there are a bunch of markings on here, which I'll put pictures up on your guys' screen. It is a Crowder cam, but sadly the number that's stamped into it comes back to their old numbering system, so I couldn't find the exact specs on this particular cam. But like I said, I'll put it up on your guys' screen. Maybe you'll have a little bit better luck than I did. It does seem to be in really good shape. All the bearing locations or journals look really good, but some of the lobes don't look so great. Nothing that you can feel with your finger or your nail, but there is a little bit of discoloration there and a little bit of like light pitting. Once again, you can't feel it though, so we'll have to make a decision later if we want to stay flat tap it or go the hydraulic roller route. Now moving on to our train drive assembly, we have a typical dual roller chain here that you'd find on most of these small block and big block Chevys. It does seem to be in really good shape with either very little or no runtime. So we'll definitely hang on to that. That might work out all right for what we're trying to do. Now moving towards the bottom end, we have our oil pump. We did find a Melling high volume pump in this thing. I believe it is the M77HV, and someone did go ahead and weld on the pickup tube. Now that's not a bad idea, then you don't have to worry about it falling off and starving this thing of oil. So we'll go ahead, set that aside. I'm not sure if that's going to be ideal for our particular setup, but we'll hang on to it for now nonetheless. So now that we've seen our valve train and our oil pump, let's move on to the connecting rods, the crankshaft, and the pistons. So now that we've seen the cylinder heads and our timing set, we're going to move on to the bottom end. So as you guys seen yesterday when we pulled these out, I gave you a quick description of what we have here.
but they do seem to be a forged factory rod in really good shape, and they were machined at one point or another. I don't see any discoloration or bluing or anything like that, so I think they're totally usable for now to get this thing up and running. Now, as we move up to the piston itself, I believe the number comes back to a Speed Pro. I'll put a picture up on your guys' screen just in case I'm wrong, but the number stamped in them is L2240N, and they do seem to be a 60 over piston. They are aluminum forged, so they do seem to be a pretty nice little deal here. They do have a dome on them, and for our combo, I think that's actually a good thing. Normally for boost, you want a lower compression setup, but with our current cylinder head and block setup, I think we would be pretty low compression still. So if these are all savable, I'd like to go ahead and reuse them. Now, moving over here to the engine block and the crankshaft itself, as I showed you guys the other day when we took this thing apart quick, we did sadly find a little bit of damage up here on these front journals. Now, it seems to be pretty common on these older big blocks after doing a little bit of research. Now, this one here I can't barely feel at all, but this one here is definitely our problem child. I can feel those grooves pretty aggressively, and then this one I can catch with my nail. Same with this one, I can just barely feel anything. And then from there back, the crank looks absolutely immaculate. So big bummer there, because this is a factory forged GM crankshaft. So I'd really like to be able to fix this or use it. I was hoping it was going to be good to go, but you know, sometimes that's just how it goes. So we're going to have to bring this over to the machine shop, have him take a look at it, see if he thinks it's worth fixing for what we're trying to do, and we'll have to go from there with it. Because like I said, I would really like to be able to reuse this crank, but I also don't want to put a whole bunch of money into this crankshaft when we could just buy a forged aftermarket crank that could handle even more power than this block probably could. Now, as you guys can see, it is a 2-bolt main block, which once again, slightly a bummer, but we could go ahead and throw studs in this thing, and I think it would hold up to what we're trying to do perfectly fine. Now, the only bonus of this thing having to come all the way apart is it does give us the chance to go ahead and hone and clean up each cylinder just while it's apart, and we can clean this thing all out now since the crank had to come out anyways. So like I said, guys, that's pretty much where we stand with the bottom end here. Really nice parts inside this old school engine. Now we're going to head over to the machine shop. I'm going to see what those guys say, so make sure to stick around for the next video, which we will be working on either the cylinder heads or, fingers crossed, hopefully we'll have what we need to start putting this thing back together. As always, I appreciate you guys for checking out the channel. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, ring that bell, and check us out on all of our other social media platforms: Facebook, TikTok, and Bought to Build Official on Instagram. And we will catch you on the next one.